And hi, everyone. I'm Mac, the Gray Skeptic. Thanks for coming. And I'm here with Holy Kool-Aid, Thomas Westbrook. Um, so say hi, Thomas.
Hey, thanks so much for having me on.
Thank you so much for coming. Um, um, in case anyone doesn't know, haha, who you are, why don't you tell them what your channel is about and about the Here and How podcast, and then we'll go ahead and get the show on the road.
So, my name's Thomas Westbrook. I have a show called Holy Kool-Aid that I've been doing for about 2 years full time now. And I try to promote rational thought and I try to take kind of complex ideas, like whether it's dealing with, you know, how life came from non-life and the topic of like abiogenesis, or whether it's just exploring whether or not something is true, something like psychic phenomenon and stuff. And I'll explore how we know what we know and whether or not something's true using a scientific point of view. And I'll use the scientific method and certain studies and stuff to try to figure out why we know the things that we know and why it's reliable, but I do it in a laser focused way, and I try to use like animations and humor and stuff. So that's my channel. It's called Holy Kool-Aid. And then I have a longer form podcast called The Here and How with YouTubers Rachel Oates and Rationality Rules. And the Here and How podcast it's more like exploring big ideas, but we'll dive into the past of like the history of these ideas, and then we'll look into the future. So we might look at like the history of artificial intelligence, and then the future of like, will we be replaced by robots, or will things like philosophical topics, like what part of yourself makes you an individual. So it's a lot of fun, and we try to kind of promote basically a mindset of growth and of human potential to push ourselves as the human race, like the collective us, to our greatest potential. So
Terrific. And just so you know, at least on my side, it was really funny because when you said, will we be replaced by robots, you completely roboted out during this. So, sign. Great. But yeah, if you guys have not checked out the Here and How podcast, please do so. That's one of the newer things that Thomas is doing right now. And they could use a ton more subscribers. So go do that right now if you haven't. What we're saying.
Thank you.
Yeah.
If my audio and my video is a little bit not as good as normal, it's because I just moved into a place here in Austin, and I haven't had time to set up my lighting, to set up any kind of backdrop. So like the lighting is pretty bad, and I'm just using like a headset mic. Normally, I really try to focus on quality and stuff, but hopefully this is passable for now.
Yeah. No. Yeah, it's cool. As I said before, I definitely appreciate you making the time to come on and discuss this topic with me. I watched a video of yours recently, which I believe I commented on, and it was basically this topic: like, is religion harmful? I thought it'd be really, really great to have this discussion with you. And since you do kind of you do the Here and How podcast as well, I kind of wanted to dive deeper into a few topics with you. So the first thing, if anyone's seen it yet, I know the Non Sequitur show was on when I uploaded it, but I just uploaded a new video, and it covers the Catholic Church scandal, where the grand jury report was released on August 13th. So I wanted to know a little bit about what you know on it and your take on it. I know you have 2 or 3 videos out on the topic.
I have 2 videos on the topic, and then one that is kind of doing a little bit of a comparison to like, what if it was Build-A-Bear that was doing the stuff that the church is doing.
Gotcha.
So
yeah, because that's I think that's important, because something that Bill Donahue likes to point out is like, the public schools do this, how are we going to deal with that? So I feel like it's kind of important to be consistent and be like, what if Build-A-Bear did this? What if the public school does this? Well, every time the authority should be involved, because this is a crime.
Yeah, well, and I think that the difference is that if an organization like Build-A-Bear, and obviously like this is purely hypothetical. Like Build-A-Bear's never, had any kind of blemish like this that I'm aware of.
Right.
But if you had an organization like this that, people trust their kids around, the employees there, they'll take them into the store, they'll buy teddy bears and stuff for them. But if you imagine if, let's say that one of the employees were to take one of the teddy bears and put a little camera in the eye so that it could spy on your kids, they'd be pretty outraged over something, as I say, as small as that, but obviously it's a huge invasion of privacy, and we're extremely protective about our kids.
Yes.
But then if instead of just doing that, if it was a systemic thing and it wasn't just a few employees, but it was the entire company, or that it was widespread throughout the company, and then you find out that they're covering it up and they're moving it around, and then instead of just spying on kids, they were actually raping them, and that then the kids or the employees were put in charge of orphanages and stuff like that. And you can imagine that the public outrage would be to the extent that they would be taking pitchforks and torches, proverbially, and nowadays it'd be AK-47s or AR-15s or something.
Right. It's not just going to be white nationalists going and being mad about it.
It would be, everyone would be outraged, and they'd boycott the company. They wouldn't give any of their money to it. They would demand that it be fixed. It would be driven out of business if they didn't instantly issue an apology and fire all the people and do something about it. Then people would burn it to the ground, and they'd be rightfully pissed off about this stuff. And yet when the Catholic Church is literally doing exactly all of that, then the outrage, it's there, but it's a lot less than it should be. And you have Catholics who are coming out and saying, well, I'm still tithing. I still think it's a good organization. It's just a few bad apples. And then you start really digging into it, and you start realizing the scale of not just the abuse. Because the abuse is one thing. It's one thing to say, hey, every organization has a few, people who are criminals, a few rapists, a few pedophiles. Like, when that happens, you get rid of them and you drain the swamp, so to speak. But the fact that all of that is happening and they're covering it up, to give you kind of an idea of the numbers, like in Pennsylvania, they investigated, I think it was just like 6 dioceses. Mm-hmm. And what they found was in these 6 dioceses that there had been, I want to get the numbers right. I want to say it was 300 priests and over 1,000 instances.
Yeah, it was 301 priests and well over 1,000 kids, and that's just the ones that they confirmed.
Yeah,
they redacted some.
I may be slightly off on some of the numbers. It's been, I mean, it was back in August when this was released, so I'm trying to jog this from memory. But this was just in 6 dioceses, and the Catholic Church has over 3,000 ecclesiastical jurisdictions. So that kind of gives you an idea of the scale. Like this, and this isn't unique to Philadelphia. This is something that when Boston exposed, what was going on in their diocese, like, we thought that was a huge one-off, and then it turned out that this was going on in Ireland, it's going on in Australia, it's going on in Chile, every single place that the Catholic Church has been investigated, they found not just abuse, but cover-up. And oftentimes they'll move the priests from, if they're in like a country like the US where, they're more likely to get caught and they're more likely to face judgment, oftentimes they'll move them to places like South America where pretty much all of the, judges and police and everyone else is Catholic, and the priests hold a tremendous amount of power. So they'll shift them down there in charge of like orphanages and stuff, and put these people who already have accusations of molesting children, of raping children, they'll put them in charge of kids. And it's just, there's no, they say that they have that they implemented a zero tolerance policy after the Boston Globe released its spotlight report into the Catholic Church's abuses, but they really didn't. It was just as long as we don't get caught, they'll just keep shuffling the kitty fiddlers around, and it's barbaric, it's awful, but it's massive. And I've kind of been going off, I've been raising awareness on this on a number of different podcasts and channels and stuff, but it's it's not just the Catholic Church. It happens in other religious organizations too. It happens with Jehovah's Witnesses. It happens with Mormons. It happens with Muslims, and it happens with Protestant churches. The reason that the Catholic Church is so monolithic in this regard is because they're a multi-billion-dollar organization, and they're not just a religious church. They have an entire country. So they have diplomatic immunity. They can just move the priests to the Vatican, and they're pretty much safe. It's crazy the extent that the level of protection that they have that is literally turned the church into a pedophile's paradise.
Yeah, it's almost like they have like diplomatic immunity because the Vatican's like their own nation even, and they have way too much power. They have way too much power.
Yeah, and it just kind of depends on, are the priests, are they caught and are they prosecuted, or do they have time to kind of be shifted around and moved? And we saw this with Cardinal Pell in Australia, where basically there were allegations against him, and he flew to the Vatican, and he's like, oh, I have health issues, I have to stay here, I can't travel. And oftentimes you even have like people like a Cardinal Law in Boston, who, even though it was found that even a cardinal is covering up these abuses. It's like, it's not just a few priests or a few cardinals who are covering up this stuff. And when that's found out, it's like, oh well, we'll remove him from his office, but then we'll move him out to the Vatican, and he literally was put in a position where he was in charge of voting for the next pope. So it's almost like he gets a freaking promotion. Under what other circumstances does that happen, where you cover up child rape and then you get to elect one of the most powerful religious leaders in the world?
Yeah, it's just so ass backwards is what it is.
Yeah.
And you had mentioned Ireland as well, and for people who don't know, because I'm not sure if everyone does, and Tom, in the early to mid 1900s, there was an orphanage that was run by the Catholic Church, and long story very short, they misplaced about 800 kids, like 796, and just found them in mass graves. And the reason that they were taking these kids in the first place was just they were taking the kids from like unwed mothers, and just in instances that the church deemed acceptable to take kids for a better life. And I'm not sure if it was Catholics or just Christians in a general. When we came to the U.S. and like Canada, we would take kids away from Native American families and just put them in schools, but not let them go home for months at a time. We were trying to get rid of their heritage so we could push our own agenda. We, as in white Christians, if you've ever been one, we were trying to get rid of their heritage and kind of push our better religion. And
well, isn't that the white man's burden?
Yeah, pretty much. So what it mostly comes down to for me, I'll kind of just share my opinion, is that it all comes down to the faith aspect, the belief. I think you can appreciate a religion and cultural differences and traditions without believing, having just blind faith in what you're appreciating. But when you have faith, like what the priests like weaponized basically in all of these situations with the Catholic Church in Pennsylvania, that's where it's dangerous. That's what makes religion harmful, is that you just believe it no matter what.
Well, it's this notion that you're not supposed to question. You're not supposed to doubt. The very first video that I ever made on my channel was wrestling with that idea, because I genuinely believe that religion, not in every case, obviously there are extremely inquisitive religious people. My religious studies professor in university, he got a PhD, and he kept on saying, like, I had more doubts and more questions after every single degree, and like I just was really curious, and like I respected the genuine inquisitiveness of a man like that. But at the same time, I do think that whenever you take a doctrine, you have a notion that you have to accept things on faith, that doubt is not seen as a good thing. In any other circumstances, you would say doubt is a good thing. You're buying a used car. You want to say, wait a second, like he's saying that it's, the bee's knees, this thing is amazing, it's perfect, and yet it has, 200,000 miles on it, and let me at least look under the hood. You know, if you are buying into anything, if you're buying a house, if you're buying into a timeshare, if you want to read the fine print, you want to have a little bit of doubt, you want to be a little bit skeptical. And if everything that you're being told and fed is completely legit and true, a little bit of scrutiny isn't going to alter that. It's not going to change it. Whereas you have people like Thomas Aquinas saying that, doubt is bad and that, you're supposed to just take things on faith. You have people like Plutarch saying the same thing, that curiosity is bad, it's a vice. You have doubting Thomas in the Old Testament is vilified for saying, hey, I want the evidence. I want to be able to touch the wounds of Christ. And, while that story is purely fictional, I think that the message is completely backwards from how we're supposed to be. That's supposed to be the hero of the story, not the person who got it wrong.
Right.
It's like he dared to be a little bit skeptical and a little inquisitive, and I think that's how all of us should be, because if there actually is something to it, and if there actually is something to these religious claims, then you should be able to really, really dig deep and be inquisitive and search and look under every single rock, and it's not going to alter the truth.
Right. Right.
Nice T-shirt, by the way.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I love it.
That's awesome.
Yeah, if you guys haven't seen my shirt, you should definitely go check out Cooley Cooley's shop. Especially since I don't have one yet, so you go check his out. Yeah. But yeah, and we were talking in the live chat just a little bit about the devil, and he's the one who questions, right? He's if he's that old snake or whatever, he's the one who kind of asks questions. He's the antagonizer. But if you don't know the difference between good and evil, and if you don't have knowledge, where are you ever going to get in life? This is why I think that humanism is a much better worldview, has a much better principle base than any religion that I've seen, because one, it kind of requires you to question, because humanism is backed up by science. Like, we look to science in humanism to find out what's true and false. And
I think that's more skepticism than humanism, because I see humanism as kind of a moral framework. I see it as like you care about human progress and you care about human well-being.
Yes.
Whereas, you could be a humanist and still believe in all kinds of woo. And you could believe that, oh, hey, I'm a humanist, but I believe in I'm going to do some type of energy healing and align, your chakras and do some, weird mumbo jumbo, spiritual crap. And that's not science-based at all. But I think that if you couple scientific skepticism with secular humanism, then you end up with the best of all worlds. But
yeah. I agree.
I think that I think maybe where you're getting at with it is, if you start with scientific skepticism, it'll most likely lead you to secular humanism.
I think it does. I think it definitely does. And I've read a little bit about humanism, and a few different sources I've seen that that they get their, I can't remember the terminology, but humanism kind of gets its information from science. Like, it wants to know what is true and false by scientific research. So it kind of appeals to science.
Yeah, I mean, I think it definitely can, but I think that there's different strains of humanism, just like there's different,
But absolutely.
It's not usually based in dogma.
Right. Exactly.
And I think that that's a key difference, is that, and I was just on Objectively Dan's show, Truth Wanted, here at the ACA, and probably like 2 hours ago, actually, and or a couple hours ago, and one of the callers that called in was talking about dogma, and he was asking about, is it ever, do the merits of religion ever outweigh the cons, and seeing the good sides to it and stuff. And he talked about how sometimes accepting dogma can like lead to better societal cohesion, and I don't think dogma is ever a good thing, because yeah, you may have a very cohesive 1984 totalitarian authoritarian society,
Mm-hmm.
but you're not going to be free. You're going to probably be miserable. There's no inquisitiveness. You can't question the status quo. You can't push society forward and really look under every single rock and see if we're going about things the best possible way, because it's all top down. You can't think for yourself, and it stagnates progress, and it stagnates society. And oftentimes it ends up in incredibly, not just backwards, but usually harmful agendas and harmful policies that are put forth. Because when the beauty of having a society where you can question everything is that progress exponentiates. You start with something as like, well, is this the best? No, there's this that's better. Well, let's test that. There's this that's better. And if everyone is doing that all the time, constantly, you're able to peel off what doesn't work and test and try and experiment and see what the best. If instead you say this is sacred, if you speak out against this, then that's blasphemy, and you're an apostate, and we're going to kill you and shut you up, then you're not able to have growth at that rate. It's just some other leader comes along and says, well, actually, now this is better. And maybe it's not. Maybe it's worse. Maybe it's 10 steps backwards. But you're not able to really test it with the same level of rigor that you would when you're free, and free not just to talk and to write, but to criticize. So I think dogma is extremely dangerous, and I feel like every single religious text that I've ever seen, with a couple of exceptions, tends to put forth notions dogmatically, and it's either you accept it on faith, or if you criticize it, then you're a blasphemer. And there's usually consequences, and whenever religions are in power, whenever you have some form of theocracy, they usually enforce it with an iron fist.
Absolutely. Yes, they do. One thing I'd like to say is that I don't think we would be where we are today if we didn't have the religious dogma in the past that we have had. Like, obviously, we have the history that we have, and we are where we are. But that said, I think we could be further, right? We could be further if we use this better method of learning and getting along with life by questioning and using the scientific method, being able to come up with the scientific method, and look at naturalism well before we were allowed to even. So that's my thoughts on that.
For sure. And I mean, that's it. Really, all of these scientific breakthroughs and whether it's the rights revolutions, where you started seeing rights for minorities, rights for LGBTQ community, rights for even children. Children didn't used to really have rights like they do nowadays. They'd work in coal mines, and they you didn't really have labor laws protecting individuals. All of this stuff, it didn't come from religion. It came after you had the Reformation, which then allowed for the Enlightenment and all the Enlightenment values. And then you had, these huge breakthroughs, scientific breakthroughs that led to the Industrial Revolution, and it led to all kinds of progress. And now it's taking off at an exponential rate. But it really came first with these, slow pushes for human rights, and for the individual to be able to speak up, which is a secular thing, to be able to question. You look at first, you have things like the Magna Carta, where it's like, oh, we can actually question the king, who before then it was like, this guy is divinely set in place. Then you had things like the Constitution. The United States Constitution is a very secular document. it separates church and state, and it allows for the rights of the individual to be, paramount, of utmost importance. You have freedom of speech to question religion without being burned at the stake. People were tired of religious persecution, and they were tired of not being able to question authority and to have that kind of dogma in place. And as soon as you set up the means for people to really step out and think for themselves and to question this dogma, that's when progress started taking off.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is a good segue to like get into education. I don't know how much you know. I know I don't know a whole lot about what's being taught in public schools right now. I know it kind of varies from state to state and sometimes from community to community. But there's a lot of obstacles that we're trying to overcome right now to kind of teach people, one, about like evolution and like the scientific method, but two, just critical thinking in general. I think personally that we should teach philosophy somewhere in high school, just to try to get different ideas into people's heads and let younger people know that there are different trains of thoughts. There's different labels for different ways of thinking, just to introduce different ways of thinking.
Yeah, I mean, I had a logic course in I think it was in high school, might have been like junior high, but I do think we need to teach people critical thinking skills and possibly epistemology in high school, where you ask, how can we know what we know, and what is, how can you tell fact from fiction? How can you tell whether something's true? How can you fact check? What are reliable sources? These are all incredibly important things, but they're skills. They're developed. The first time that you go on the internet, it's really easy to just stumble across a YouTube video that's like, oh, here's, a UFO, here's an alien, and it's, usually, someone in like Adobe After Effects that's like putting something in the sky or something, or some photoshopped image of like a blurry Loch Ness or something. And if you don't know how to fact check, if you don't know, if you haven't developed these skills over time, it's easy to fall for this stuff. But yeah, I do think philosophy is important, but specifically, I would say critical thinking, and trying to weed through some of this stuff.
Yeah, I agree, and that's the main point that I would want them to get out of it, is the critical thinking, because thinking dogmatically and not learning how to think critically not only leads to like religion, but it also leads to conspiracy theories. And like we have all these crazy conspiracy theories now, things like 9/11 never happened or didn't happen how they say. And I'm sure there's things we don't know. I think that's a given because there's so much government involvement in like investigating. But when you look at how dramatic some of these conspiracy theories are, it makes you think that no one's even trying to think of an easier way to explain anything. They're just going with the most dramatic thing because everything is a conspiracy. And then we have flat earthers and everything, just conspiracies.
Well, I think that the problem is that everyone wants to feel like they have insider information.
Oh, yeah.
Everyone wants to feel like they have some type of special truth, some type of special knowledge. And if you go to these conspiracy theorist sites, it's like, the information that the government doesn't want you to know. And that's incredibly enticing. You want to feel like you have, I know this, I'm a part of this secret group that, knows that the government's run by reptilian overlords or something. And it's not just that we don't teach people how to fact check. I think it's that it's really hard sometimes to tell good information from bad information. And if you're not a scientist, if you're not an engineer, if you don't know how the world works, it can be really easy to be taken in by, some of this, flat earth nonsense. If you don't understand, philosophy or Occam's razor or, deductive reasoning or things like that, it can be really easy to fall for this because you see, oh, this information seems a little bit off, therefore, it must be a conspiracy. And it's like, okay, well, maybe there is something that's off. But is the crazy conclusion that you're jumping to the most likely explanation? Is it the most plausible explanation? Are there motives for this to be the case? Is this scientifically possible? Is it statistically even plausible? How likely or unlikely is this? And when you really start weighing all the factors, it's like there's a million other things that would have to be the case and that you'd have to account for. And if you start having to then just come up with, pieces of evidence out of whole cloth and try to just scrape and search for something to fit your, predefined conclusion that you already have in your mind, then, you're seeking and looking for patterns that aren't there. And it's really easy to do that. But it's much harder to actually, set aside your initial convictions, to set aside your initial assumptions, and to actually examine evidence objectively and try to come about, the correct conclusion based off of, the actual evidence.
Yeah. And I think it just all drops back to education. And I feel like we've come a long way for sure. Like, the rise of like agnosticism and like atheism alone kind of shows that um, people are veering away from religion, and I hope that means people are getting a few more critical thinking skills. I know just a couple of years ago, I knew nothing of evolution except we come from monkeys, right? And along with that, there was so much else I didn't know. Like, I didn't know about the Big Bang. I didn't know a damn thing about physics. I didn't know any of the basics to get to the like extraordinary natural truths that we have today. But what really shook me out of it is learning about astronomy, because I've always loved the stars. I've always loved outer space. And when I was about 25 or 26, I started listening to Crash Course Astronomy with Phil Plait. And I went through the entire series and then went through the entire series again. um, and I learned so much. And just that amount of education, just learning like how we know, not just that we know, like light is a constant, and how we know what stars are made out of what. Learning the how really gives you a whole new view on the world and the universe. And it helps you trust science a little more, because you don't get that how with religion. You don't really get that how with conspiracy theories or on Fox News. But learning the how is so important, and you don't have to understand everything that's connected to it. Just learning that there are little experiments you can do here and there to like see that the earth isn't flat. Learning what spectrum on, I can't say
Spectroscopy.
it. Yes, that word. I'm not going to try to say it again. But just learning what that is, and how like light basically shows like a barcode of like elements. It's fascinating. It's extraordinary in its own way. And
To everyone listening who may not be aware, basically, and this was really eye opening for me too, because a lot of times you'll hear scientists will say things like, we're star stuff, and it's like, oh, that sounds kind of like almost as mystical mumbo jumbo as religion. We're all connected with the universe. But what they're actually saying is that we can point out a telescope anywhere into the cosmos, and we can look and find a nebula where there's all this gas, and there's these huge clouds of gas where stars are being formed, they're being born. And what they mean when they say that they're being born is that we can look and point our telescopes at new stars and older stars and older stars and gas clouds, and then gas clouds that are igniting, and we can see all the different steps in this progression. And we can witness what happens as these gas clouds. All it takes for a star to form is to have matter, gravity, and time. That's all you need. And it can be the most simple matter. You can have, just hydrogen, just tiny little elements of hydrogen gas, and, just clusters of them. And as because they're close enough together, the gravity pulls it all in, and then this pressure really heats it up. And it's like whenever you have pressure, there's heat because all these elements, they're pushed really closely together, they're moving around, and all of a sudden it ignites, and you have a star that comes about. And because you have so much gas, there's so much matter, this star, it burns and it burns and it burns, and it gets so hot that these elements start fusing into more and more complex elements. And you get more and more complex elements, as it's burning, as this fuel is burning up, it's pushing out, and the gravity is pulling in, and eventually it burns up all the fuel, and it collapses in, and then it explodes its guts out into the cosmos. And those, when we say those guts, like we're talking about all the elements, they're now heavier and heavier elements
Hmm.
that then form the planets, and then the same thing happens with the planets, where all these elements and this matter form together into planets, and you get these accretion disks, and it forms into planets, and they become spheres, because that's when you have all this gravity that's pushing in on it, then it's all pushing towards the center of mass. And so it becomes like spherical objects. You can only build up so high before stuff falls over. That's why we don't have mountains that are higher than much higher than like Everest or something. Everest is growing a little bit, but like past a certain point, you have like landslides, and you have things that topple, and you can only have so big of a base. And so all this is happening, and then those elements become living organisms. I have a whole series on abiogenesis, and how life can come from chemicals, and how we're nothing but chemicals. But when you start learning how we know this,
Hmm.
it's like the scientists are not just watching what's happening, they're getting like light reflects off of matter, and it splits into a very specific spectrum. And you can observe that spectrum and figure out, just by observing things here on Earth that we know what they're made of, and observe the light, the spectral light coming off of it, we can know what everything is made of. So we can look at these stars, and we can figure out exactly what is hydrogen, and what is helium, and what is oxygen. And we can see all these different signature traces. So we can see these early stars, and that they're made of really simple elements, and then observe stars later in their formation, and later in their lifespan, and see that they're made of heavier and heavier and heavier elements. And so we can see all of this happening, and there's a very specific way that scientists are able to gather this data, and it makes sense, and it's repeatable, and we can do it anywhere on Earth, and we can point our telescopes anywhere in the cosmos, and we can gather this data, and it all matches up, and it's replicable. And so this is the beautiful thing about science, is that it's not dogmatic. And if someone comes along and disproves it, then you start back at square one. But you gather more and more and more data, and all the different pieces that you're gathering of how the universe works, they're all connecting with other points of data and other experiments that you've ran, and it's all confirming something, and you're getting a bigger idea, a wider idea of how the universe works. Religion doesn't do that. It tells you, this is how it is, and in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. It happened in 6 days, and it happened that way because this book says so. And the one person who brought knowledge to the people, sort of like Prometheus stealing fire from the gods, it was the serpent in the garden, and that was seen as the evil one, and yet he's the one bringing knowledge. Why is that the case? Why is knowledge a bad thing? I never understood that.
I think it's because, just like the Tower of Babel, the gods are afraid of what the humans know,
Yeah.
right? So a few things that you didn't touch base on, because everything you said was like stupendous and like correct. I just want to share a little bit more for like if there's any Christians who ever watch this, and I just want to say it because I love talking about this topic, is that there really isn't nothing, right? The universe didn't just come from nothing. There's so much there that creates these stars and these solar systems. And when you go from that, and then a couple billion years, when a star explodes, there's even more force that goes through these atoms. So you get the heavier elements, as the Thomas was saying, from these supernovas. This is how we get like I don't know all of them, like iron and everything else. Like iron is in stars, like it's like the ashtray of a star, but you get more that we find in like our planet and other ones after these supernovas. So that's like where all of this stuff comes from, and we know that by studying the light that comes from stars and geology and other aspects of science that I can't think of right now. Like I said, you don't need to know every single part of this to know that how we know a little bit can open up a whole world of learning for you. And I think that's really important.
Absolutely. And I think that it's really eye-opening if you've never really studied any particular scientific field in depth and you don't really understand how the community works. Like you learn, most people learn in school, they'll learn the scientific method, they'll learn like create a hypothesis, test it, try to verify your hypothesis or, reevaluate if the data, disproves it or something, and then, keep going and keep doing that method. And that's really just scratching the surface because it doesn't really tell you how all of this stuff, that all these assertions that are put forth, oftentimes we'll hear scientists say things and we think of it dogmatically. We think like they're just telling us that the earth is this age, and because we don't really dive into each one of these avenues and understand like, oh well, they did this experiment which showed this, and then they found out this data which confirmed it, and then this other field confirmed that, and then this other field confirmed it. So you'll hear about something like evolution and it sounds like, oh, well, we just came from goo and monkeys. And that's such a simplistic straw man of it that it's so easy to knock over. Whereas if
just
you
rub
really,
some goo on some monkeys.
if you really start understanding not just the ins and outs of what the theory actually says, but you also start to really look in every single field, whether it's, comparative anatomy, embryology, geology, whether it's genetics, all of these areas, they start to confirm it. And yet then you'll have something like young earth creationism that says that the earth is 6,000 years old. And then all it takes is a little bit of knowledge of dendrochronology, and all of a sudden you've disproved that. And it's like that's just one field that disproves it, whereas evolution is confirmed in every single field.
Yes.
Aaron Ra has an excellent series where he goes through and he takes like the most ludicrous story in the Bible, Noah's Ark, and he goes through and he shows how like zoology disproves it, how geology disproves it, how paleontology disproves it, and he goes through like every single major field of science and shows how every single field disproves this flood. So you cannot have a literal view of the Bible, and as soon as you say part of it's literal, or part of it's not literal and it's just figurative, then how much of the rest of it is figurative? Is the Genesis story, then is the fall a figurative, and then did Christ die for an allegory? Am I supposed to believe that? Like it's bullshit. It's complete bullshit. And science doesn't that. If one thing is proven wrong in science, well, you go back to the drawing board.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because that's what you have to do. And
if you care about the truth.
Yeah, and I do, and I hope everyone else does. I hope anyone who watches this video who doesn't have a like mind like this, like go prove us wrong, and you might see you can't, and then just run with it. Just run with it. It'll open up a whole world. I was just watching that first video of Aaron Ra's debunking the Ark just last night, so that makes me really happy that you mentioned it. That's really funny.
Aaron's a great guy.
He really is. I haven't gotten a chance to talk to him yet, but he's such a cool dude. Such a cool dude. But yeah, astronomy and science is something that I could talk about all day because there's the little bit that I do know that I'm super passionate about that's like opened up a world for me. And then just hearing someone competent talk about it just makes for great conversation all the time. But we won't spend the next hour doing that because that's not the main topic. But I'm so glad that we touched base on it because it's part of the bigger topic. Yeah. But yeah, this that has been really cool. I'm trying to think of the other point that I wanted to touch on.
Well, I'll say one thing kind of on that note, just as we're talking about how you can know things. The beautiful thing with that is that once you realize that that's how science operates in one field, then you start to realize that there's all this other stuff that experts in other scientific communities are, there's a consensus on, but you may not know exactly how they got there. As soon as you have that revelation, it's the most humbling thing in the world because you start to realize how little you actually know. So the more that you start to learn about the world, you start to realize how much is on the periphery and on the edge of your understanding and how little you actually know. But at that point, you start to realize how, once you know how the community works, once you know how scientists go about learning about how the universe works, you realize two things. One, we can know how the universe works, and
Mhm.
it's worth exploring, and it's worth looking into. And there's a way and there's a method to find out how the universe works, and we can know that, and that method is called science, and it's an investigative process. And the second thing is you realize that just because you don't know something doesn't mean that someone else doesn't. It doesn't mean that there's not someone out there who understands this, who's studied this field thoroughly, who's an expert in it. Maybe there's solutions out there to problems that you think are problems that aren't. And even if that's not the case, that doesn't mean that we'll never know it just because someone doesn't know yet. It means that we're on the edges of human exploration, and that it's a cognitive journey that maybe you can embark on, and maybe you can be the next scientist to explore this new field and to win a Nobel Prize, or better yet, just to make humanity more knowledgeable on an issue that pushes all of society and all of humanity forward. And I think that's what really gets me excited about science and human progress, is seeing where we can get, whether it's inventing some new technology or extending human life or eliminating some horrific disease, or just putting forth some new scientific theory that explores theoretical physics or explores the nature of the cosmos and uncovers some new mystery. Like, that's extremely exciting, and we get there by looking under every single rock. And you know it's just because you don't know something yet doesn't mean that you can't learn.
Did I was muted. Um, but yeah, that's absolutely right. And all of this stuff, as Thomas said, is we can not prove, but we can confirm that evolution works, right? We can confirm this theory by looking at other theories. Like, everything's like transferable. So just scratching the surface on anything that strikes your fancy can literally, again, just open up a whole world to you. And when you find a new topic, chances are that something that you learned in topic A, um, you'll find it somewhere hidden in topic B, because it's just the whole world works, like the whole universe like goes by laws, and um, it just kind of confirms everything. And just learning the how is not only helpful, it's its own kind of beautiful. It's really cool.
It's like every field overlaps.
Yeah.
Every single field overlaps. And one of the most beautiful things about the internet nowadays is you can find courses almost free or completely free in just about everything. So if you go to Coursera or edX, they have courses from Harvard and Yale and Cambridge and Oxford and Berkeley and everywhere else that you can possibly think of. And there's MIT has their own open courseware and stuff. You can take classes from Ivy League schools, you know, for free on the internet, and it's incredible. And there's also like the great courses and other, you can listen to audiobooks and stuff. But when I first graduated from college, like, I started exploring a wide variety of topics that I was just interested in, that piqued my curiosity. And what I started finding is that, like, I took a great course on genetics, and then I started studying chemistry and biochemistry specifically. And I started, to understand how these fields overlapped, how the chemicals, there's kind of a gradient between life and non-life, and you start seeing chemicals that will naturally form together in certain circumstances, and then they start behaving in life-like ways, and then they start developing, lifelike functions, and then they start reproducing, and then they start being selected for, and then pretty soon it's like, where is the line between life and non-life? But you start seeing all this, but you realize that all of the DNA and the RNA that codes for all the proteins that make life possible, they're all made up of elements. They're made up of molecules. They're made up of the stuff that we study in chemistry class because they're chemicals. Like you're
Hmm.
chemicals. We're all chemicals. So like these fields overlap, and then that overlaps with like biology and all the organs and the anatomy that we study and stuff. And then like you start seeing how you study geology and you realize that the geosphere and the biosphere are just completely linked together. And you start to see how there's a layer. If you dig down far enough, you'll see like a layer of iron deposits where there was at one point all of these algae that started spewing up oxygen into the atmosphere, oxidized our environment, and all of this new oxygen started forming rust. It started causing the core or the outer shell of the earth to rust, and so you have these layers of iron deposits, and then you start having trees that are able to breathe this in, and you start having different chemicals and stuff, or different rocks and stuff that allow for chemical reactions that allowed life to take place and get kick started in the first place. So it's like they're all playing into each other, and so you see this link between rocks and minerals and chemistry and life and these chemical reactions, and it's all linked together. And the more that you study these fields, the more that you realize like you can't really get a full grasp for just how interconnected all these fields of study are, and how much we know about the early earth, or we know about life on earth, or we know about evolution. That it's not just from one field of study, it's from all of them, and they overlap so heavily and so much, but it all confirms this one theory. There's a reason why evolution is one of the most evidential theories that we have in existence, like up there with like the theory of gravity. And it's because it's been hammered on so hard again and again and again and again. And there's been multiple theories of evolution. Like we knew that life evolved from less complex life, but there was Lamarckian evolution, there was Darwinian evolution through natural selection and stuff. And the ones that we found had the most word, and then you have people like Richard Dawkins saying that it's happening not at the individual level, but at the gene level, which is insane when you really start to think of the ramifications and repercussions of that. And like then when he puts forth his argument as to why that's the case and why that makes sense, it actually really does make sense, and there's evidence behind it, and so it's to me that's fascinating. Is that and I'm getting excited just because these are areas that were never introduced to me when I was a young Earth creationist. But the more that I started looking into it, and the more you start studying other fields, like go outside your field of expertise and just pick up some books in other different scientific disciplines on areas like this, and you'll see just how much it overlaps, and it's incredible.
Yeah, and again, we are star stuff.
Yeah,
it's fun.
And that's where astrophysics and astronomy, another field, overlaps with it, and that's chemistry overlapping with that. So yeah.
It all connects. It all connects. That's why when I was getting out of my Christianity, I kind of started to adhere to God is everything. He is everywhere. He's like this awareness of the universe, and the universe is connected. And eventually, obviously, I dropped that. But I thought if there's any kind of religious truth, that would have to be it, or that it ought to be it, because like God should be this best good being, and he should be part of everything if he made everything. And it's just, I think if you take the God part out of it, you get a good grain of truth. Like everything is connected because everything is part of the universe. And it's
you have to be careful kind of with that.
Okay.
You have to be careful with that because I hear this, the universe is all connected, right? And I'm like, yes, but not consciously.
Right.
And there's a point where a lot of times you'll see people who are like, new age, mystical, oh yeah, we're all connected because everything is energy, and it's like not exactly. And they'll say like I went to this Buddhist meditation thing a couple weeks ago, and I really enjoyed like the mindfulness aspect of it. I really enjoyed kind of the walking meditation and the silent sitting and just contemplating existence and stuff. Like it's very healthy. There's a scientific aspect to mindfulness and stuff. Sam Harris has done some great work in this area.
Yeah.
But when you start talking in terms of, like, it was like after that session was done, this woman was talking to me about how excited she was that, yeah, you're all part of the universe and everything is energy, right? Science has shown that. And I was like, well, I'm not sure you understand what energy means. And she's like, we can sense each other's emotions. I was like, yes, because we have mirror neurons and I can see what you're feeling and I can, hear what you're saying, your tone of voice, and I can get a feel for it. And she's like, no, 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 no. You can, even if you close your eyes and stuff, you can feel it. And I was like, really? And I'm like, okay, if that's the case, and let's be scientific about this because I'm willing to be proven wrong. If that's the case, we should be able to test it. And I'm like, what's just off the top of my head, I can think of one way that would be super easy. If I close my eyes and blindfold and plug my ears and stuff, you stand behind me and you suddenly go from feeling really happy to really sad or really angry or something, but don't touch me, don't breathe on me, don't, no interaction. I should be able to feel that energy, right? It's like, oh, yeah, people have done tests like that. I'm like, really? They have? Like, the only ones that I've heard of have been, like, skeptics and people like James Randi, and it's shown it to be bunk. And she's like, no, they've done tests that's shown it. And I was like, I would really be curious to see your sources on that.
Yeah.
And if it's something that's been, done in a reputable peer-reviewed scientific journal and it's been repeated, and then I think that would be a Nobel Prize winning study because that would overturn everything that we know about the laws of physics.
Hell yeah. Yeah.
But in terms of the entire universe, like, being interconnected, it's like, in a way that there's limitations to it, right? Like, we have, yes, we are gravitationally connected, but we can measure that. We can look at the force of gravity, and we can measure, we can plot it out mathematically. We can make equations that say, the further away that you get, the force of gravity goes, exponentially lower.
Yes.
Okay. We can measure the strong and the weak force, and we know that, basically past the atomic scales, you're not going to feel it, right? We can measure the electromagnetic force. We know, how that works, and those are the four fundamental forces of nature. There's no evidence of any other force. We haven't picked up on any other force. There's not really any evidence to believe that there's another force. And until there is, then it's like, you can say all you want that we're all interconnected, and it's like, yes, to some extent, we have, we're all moving through space-time, and that, we have gravitational attractions and whatnot. But to say that there's some type of weird, conscious connectivity between people and that you can kind of tap into it on some weird electromagnetic spectrum that somehow, for some reason, is completely undetectable, when we're scanning for, different frequencies, electromagnetic frequencies, and yet somehow you can, telepathically communicate with mushrooms and with other people and be psychic with dead people is a bit of a stretch.
Right. Yeah. I think some people are overly empathetic about it. And like what I was talking about, I was trying to use a little bit of nuance and just like say it in like a poetic way, of course. But yeah, I know people get yeah, go for it.
Have you seen Science Saved My Soul by Phil Hellens?
I have not.
It's exactly up your alley when you're talking about that. Like, it is a beautiful. I think the guy is. I think he's a physicist.
You say Phil Hellens?
Phil Hellens, PhilHellenes, and if you type in "Science Saved My Soul" in YouTube, it's the first video that pops up. It has like 1.7 million views.
Okay.
But it's basically he's a skeptic, an atheist, and at the very least he's an amateur astronomer. But I'm pretty sure that I think he's either I don't know his exact profession, but he has this extremely beautiful poetic way of talking about the cosmos and this how he has more of, if you could call anything a spiritual experience, it's feeling this oneness with nature, feeling this connectivity with the cosmos, knowing that we're forged in the hearts of stars, that it's far more beautiful than any brutal, age-old, ancient, dogmatic crap about, some deity that has, human-like flaws, telling someone to kill their own son, or telling people to slaughter and commit genocide and cut off the tips of their dicks. It's so much more just fulfilling and enlightening and awakening and spiritual and beautiful, knowing that we're part of this universe, and that when we die, we're going to be recycled back into it, and that the air that we breathe is the same air that was breathed by all of the thousands of ancients that came before us, and that we're building on their shoulders a society and this human, incredible. I'm obviously I'm taking it a step further than what he said, but like, to me at least, like, it's, you see this development and this progress, and it's extremely exciting and it's encouraging, and we are a part of that. We are in the process of that, and we've come from beautiful origins, from incredible origins, and yet at the same time it's a little bit humbling, because we feel incredibly small. We also came from humble origins, and yet we're here, and we're here for this brief moment in the sun, so we have to make the most of it.
Yeah, and that's what causes value, is the limitations that we have to experience it, and the limitation that the universe that we know won't really last forever. Like, we'll have the I forget what they call it, but like, the universe will burn out. We'll have the, I don't know, heat death. I was gonna say dark ages. I'm like, that's not it. That's not it at all.
No, fortunately, we're already past those. Although,
yeah.
Who knows, with the all the religious theocrats in office right now, we may be approaching a second wave of dark ages.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hope not.
I hope not as well.
That's why we're doing what we're doing. Is human progress.
Yes. Yes, and that's looking at it at a secular way. There's a lot of sad, but there's also a lot of amazing and human progress, and I think it's really cool. Last topic that I want to touch on.
I think it's important.
Go ahead.
What did you say? I think it's important too. Like, I look at politics, and I look at religion and stuff, and it's so easy to get caught up in the negative news stories and the backwards lowlights, if you will. I don't know what the opposite of a highlight is, but what do they call the opposite of a highlight? Help us out,
Chat. I'm not sure.
The down periods, the shit bits.
Shit bits. I think that's it. Shit bits.
So for those periods, it's so easy to focus on that. There's such a negative media bias, where you see all the stuff that is wrong with the world, all the genocides and all the homicides and the crime rates and stuff, and it's so easy to let that overshadow actual progress and actual growth, and to forget about the fact that right now, as we speak, there are thousands of organizations that are pushing humanity forward, and it's not just Elon Musk single-handedly trying to explore Mars. You've got, even just in the realm of space exploration, you have, dozens and dozens and dozens of both independent and, national space agencies that are, whether it's just sending satellites up, or whether it's, sending people up into space. You've got all this stuff where we are doing research on computers and microprocessors and robotics, and trying to end diseases and eradicate things like malaria. You got the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation that's pushing heavily for that. You've got Mark Zuckerberg invested $5 billion in eradication of disease. And these are just a couple cases, but this is happening all across the globe, with millions and millions of people working on this stuff. And we lose sight of the fact that, I want to say, I was just at SciCon. I got to meet Steven Pinker, and in his talk, he mentioned how, if you heard in the newspaper a news story that said 147,000 people rose out of poverty today, you would think, oh my God, that's amazing. That's a beautiful news story. But the fact of the matter is that they could have literally run that story every single day for the last 30 years. Or I forget if it was 30 but it was
Right.
a massive, massive number. And you look at the GDP per capita and how it has risen and how crime rates have fallen and total fertility rates have fallen and you know we've had increased access to food and clean drinking water everywhere. And yeah, there's a few pockets of fighting and civil war and outbreaks of famine and stuff, but it's not anywhere to the scale that it used to be. We're living in the most peaceful time in human history. We're living in the most abundant time of human history, and it's only getting better. It's only getting better because we're having new breakthroughs every day in aquaculture and in agriculture and in water desalination and in education breakthroughs and in technology breakthroughs. And it really is the most amazing time in all of human history to be alive. So it can be incredibly depressing. Progress definitely isn't a sure thing. Like we have to work at it. We
Mhm.
have to fight for it. Right now climate change is a legitimate issue. It is
Right.
happening. And it does overshadow a lot of things, whether it's the caravan of immigrants coming to the US because there's massive droughts and stuff that are caused by climate change, and yet we're pulling out of the Paris Climate Accords. Like these are serious issues. You got the fires in
Yeah.
California that are going on because of climate change. You got islands that are soon going to be underwater. You have entire um, countries that are, island countries that are worried about this. These are legitimate issues that we have to worry about. But at the same time, like we have to not lose sight of human progress and, kind of steep ourselves in depression and pessimism, because the fact is that the world is changing and is changing for the better, but it's changing for the better because of people like you guys who are out there spreading information, encouraging people to learn and to be curious and to fall in love with science. And it's because of people who are boots on the ground, hands on, actually fighting to make it better.
Yeah. And I think, like you said, it's important to know what's going on in the world, and important to know all the shit bits. But I'm glad you brought up Pinker, because I was going to bring up Pinker if you didn't. Because I just almost finished the audio book that I was listening to runs out before the book's over. But I just finished Better Angels of Our Nature, and that's
It's
what
such a good
that
book.
book covers. Yeah, I think it might be my new favorite book. It's really
Enlightenment.
fantastic.
Enlightenment now is on my list to read, but I really want to read it too.
There you
He's
go.
he's he's an excellent author, and he really does his research well. And I say this as someone who, I studied political science in college, and like the way that Pinker teaches and the way that he lays it out and the detail and the research and the depth that he goes to is it's better than any poli sci professor I ever had.
Yeah.
And he's really fucking cool too. Like at SciCon, I got him to get out on the dance floor, and like the guy's got moves. He's like he's almost like a kind of the cool hippie professor that you wish you always had, but at the same time, he's an absolutely brilliant man and a brilliant thinker.
Yeah, you posted some of those pictures on our Leah Facebook page. That was
Yeah.
super cool. Super cool. And I just got his other book, Blank Slate.
Oh, nice. Yeah,
And
I think that was one of his earlier ones.
I think so. Um, yeah, but the I went to go pick up Better Angels of Our Nature so I could finish it up, and then this is what I found. So I'm like, all right, I'll take that, and I ordered the other one, and it's in. I just have to go pick it up.
Nice.
Um, but yeah, what other topic that I wanted to talk to you about? We probably should be wrapping up soon. I don't want to keep you on too long, and I don't like to make these too much longer than an hour and a half because no one wants to watch them. But is morality. I love talking about morality, and I think religion and dogmatic thinking really kind of fucks with it quite a bit. So I kind of wanted to get your take on it, because mine is that morality, um, I think it's kind of best placed in humanism. Like you said, it's a good moral framework. But I see it as this ever changing, this evolving thing. As we learn more about humanity, as we learn more about the universe and science, like morality is something that just grows as humanity does. And I think that's a really cool thing, and it makes it pliable so we can make it better. It shouldn't be a dogmatic thing. It shouldn't be objective as an absolute.
Yeah, I always hear religious people put forth morality as an objective thing. Like that's a good thing. Like it's never changing.
Mm-hmm.
And I look at what their idea of, the original idea of morality, the Ten Commandments, not just the Ten Commandments, which if you really start breaking them down, it's like have no other god before me, don't have any graven images. It's like, really, this is the best that you can come up with? How about like don't rape kids? Like
Right.
that'd be a good starting one. I think there'd be a lot of religious members that would be disqualified on those grounds. But or
True
how
that.
about don't enslave another human being? You
Right.
know, these are things that are so easy to put forth, and yet you have religious people to this day, and I've literally had these arguments on multiple occasions
Mm-hmm.
with religious apologists who say that they'll try to justify slavery and say like, oh, it was actually a good thing at the time, and that they were actually doing them a service because a lot of these people, they didn't really have jobs, and it was more like indentured servitude and like the hoops that they jump through. And then they'll say like, oh, well, when it says, um, go easy on your slaves and masters, don't really beat your slaves like you used to anymore and stuff. It's like, wait a second, like we're talking about owning another human being, and when you really start looking into it, like there's a distinction that was made between how you would treat a Jewish slave versus a Gentile slave, and the Jewish slaves had it a lot better off, but the Gentile slaves were kind of SOL.
Mm-hmm.
And there's still this distinction between like, well, the Jews are the chosen people, they're the good ones, but the Gentiles on the other hand are not. And it's, you look at the way that morality has changed since that time, and almost all of it is scrapped. Almost all of it is thrown out,
Mm-hmm.
except for a couple things they'll say, like, well, but what would we do without the Ten Commandments, without knowing not to kill and not to, lie and, or to specifically to perjure ourselves and, not to cheat on our spouses and stuff. It's like, well, wait a second. Don't kill, don't steal. Like, these are things that are innate in every society. You
Mm-hmm.
can't get very far anywhere if you just go around murdering and stealing and doing all this stuff. Like, it's insane that they think that you have to have that in tablet form for it to be somehow satiant for everyone to to adopt. It's insane. And yet you have societies the world over that understand that we probably shouldn't kill each other, and yet you look at what God literally commands according to the Old Testament right after he says don't kill, is go out and slaughter the Amalekites and slaughter anyone in the land that you find who's a Gentile, who's of worshiping foreign gods, and just completely clear them out, ethnic cleansing to the extreme. And fortunately, most of this barbaric stuff, there's no evidence of it happening. Like a lot of the stories in the Bible, it's completely made up from whole cloth.
Right.
Um, just like the Jews never lived in Egypt. There's no evidence of that whatsoever. Um, of having slaves building pyramids, but at the same time, for them to put this forth as somehow that this is an example of morality.
Right. It was probably written off of some kind of societal norms. So,
Yeah, and a lot of it, you'll look at things like the Code of Hammurabi, or you'll look at the Analects of Confucius or something, and Hindu teachings as well, and like you'll see something that resembles the Golden Rule in just about every society. It's, hey, if we're gonna get along, treat other people the way you want to be treated, and I think that you can go a step further and say, don't treat other people the way that they don't want to be treated.
yeah.
Because it's like, oh, hey, like, I might not really mind this particular thing, but it might be your pet peeve and you might hate it. It's like just be thoughtful and considerate and don't do something to someone that they don't want done to them. You know?
Right. Be empathetic.
Yeah. Because otherwise you might have someone that comes along that says like, well, I just want to get some, so because I want to be treated that way, I'm going to go out and rape somebody. It's like no, like that's come on. So it's like even the golden rule can be outdone by the platinum rule, and yet that's the best that the Bible has to offer. You know.
Right, right. And I think that um, what you mentioned about the Ten Commandments, like where would we be without like knowing that adultery is bad, murder is bad, and all of that jazz is bad. I think that they're just ignoring so much human history that they're ignoring the fact that we probably already knew that. Like we probably already had some kind of marriage or like um, you know civil unions of people getting together, and they probably didn't like it when you messed with those bonds, and people didn't like it when you killed one of their friends or family members. Like you said, this is kind of innate in every society, and what really bogs morality down from that is religion and dogmatic thinking.
Well, and here's the thing: even that is it's purely cultural because
Yeah.
you have societies that are um, matriarchal. You have societies where I forget where it was, but there's like a tribal society that had basically um, they didn't have the concept of marriage. It was anyone basically would multiple men would sleep with a woman, and when she got pregnant, then the entire community took care of the child. So it wasn't just like a family structure. It was kind of an odd to us way, but an effective way of raising the child. I think that that's rare because in terms of evolution, usually if the father is going to invest his time and his resources and his money into a child, he wants to make sure that it's his DNA that's being carried. So you'd have to have a pretty small community, just in terms of speaking of like if you've read The Selfish Gene, and we were talking a second ago about how evolution happens at the gene level. If you have a small enough community where you share so much genetic content in common with your those around you in your community, then it might make sense. But on a larger scale, it doesn't. There's a reason why men, if a man goes out and sleeps with 20 women, it's like, oh, dude, nice, you got lucky and stuff. Whereas if a woman does it, she's called a slut. And when you actually start to look at the evolutionary background for this, it's because if a man goes out and he wants to purely in terms of spreading his genetic content around, it makes the most sense for the guy to impregnate tons and tons of different women and then to not have to really invest all of his time into the kids, but like they're gonna grow up and be raised and whatnot anyways. Whereas
Mhm.
with a woman, if she wants to give her shot, her kid the best shot at survival, she wants to make sure that she invests all of her resources into him, but she also wants to make sure that she finds a guy who's faithful, who's going to stay around, who's going to stick around with her, and she invests in that one guy because for her it's not just like a 9-month investment. She's then stuck with the child. And so she wants to make sure that she finds the one guy. And so it's kind of frowned upon for her to go and sleep with 20 different guys, and then none of them know which one is the father. And so they don't really want to deal with the kid, and it's not advantageous to her. So like there is an evolutionary basis for, why societies have kind of grown up with these certain values. That's why a lot of times in more patriarchal societies, you'd have kings that would have 20 different wives, but they had the resources and the money to take care of them.
Right.
So it's like, but in all these situations, you have reasons behind, biological reasons behind why morality arose in a particular way that it did. That doesn't necessarily mean that it still makes sense in today's day and age where we have birth control and we have condoms and we have all this other stuff. You know what I mean? And so as society and as humanity evolves, our morality has to evolve to keep up with it. It has to
Right.
keep pace with it. And to say that we have to still dictate our moral precepts based off of the societies of 2,000 years ago, before any of this stuff existed, it's a morality that's holding back society, and so we're ending up with a lot of shame and a lot of bullshit that's causing a lot more harm because society has moved past it, and our morality is still in the dark ages.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's and you can see it. You can see it in different religions that we still have today, like because every Christian religion even interprets the Bible in a different way, and it looks like an older way or a newer way, depending on like which testament and what books they focus on, and whatever. And you can kind of see from that, if you could get a timeline when this stuff was written or whatever, you can see how morality has changed by just how these communities and these families practice morality. Um, and I think it's cool to look at it. But I also think like we definitely have some sort of right to be like, no, that was shitty. That was shitty. We're past that now. Like we still do have to, I suppose, grant that, it was in a different time. But by doing that, well, we've come a long way. We can do that. It
Well,
has evolved.
you also have to grant though that if morality is based off of the time period, then it's subjective, and
Hmm.
they can't argue that they have an objective moral framework,
Right.
which is what they love to push forth.
Which,
And I'm like, one, an objective framework that never changes can never progress. It can never get better, and so it's worse. By definition, it is worse. And two, you know, they don't have an objective framework at all. And Cosmic Skeptic did a great video on this, how even if you have a god, like it cannot be an objective morality. Like you cannot have objective morality under it because it's either subjective to the whims of this divine being, this divine god, it's his subjective morality, or if it's like innate in the cosmos, you wouldn't need a god for that to happen. Like it wouldn't, you know, it would be outside of God's existence, you know.
yeah,
But
yeah,
you
I
still
agree.
there?
Yeah, yeah. Can you hear me?
Lagged a tiny bit, or
Oh,
maybe I
okay,
did.
okay, all right. Um, so before I continue the conversation, I wanted to let everyone know that we probably will be wrapping up soon. So if you guys have any questions for Thomas or I, please throw them in the live chat now, and we'll get to those as soon as we can. Um, uh, Pamela said she is also wearing her Holy Kool-Aid T-shirt.
Yay!
So I told her to post that on Twitter and add us on it so we can see.
Awesome.
But
Also,
yeah,
make sure you guys smash that like button.
yeah, hit that like
So
button.
everyone who's watching right now should have already hit that like button.
Yeah. And subscribe too. Subscribe. Get me to 300. I'm real close to 300. But yeah, I really, really appreciate this conversation we've had because it's been a fun one.
Oh yeah.
You're very knowledgeable about all of these topics, which is very clear, just from your YouTube channel alone, outside of this conversation. But yeah, it's just
I have
been really
a
fun.
broad understanding of a lot of topics, but I don't have the depth of understanding that experts do in particular fields.
Right.
So
That's why you're like a science advocate, right?
yeah, because I know enough about how science works, and I know enough about how these fields overlap to put different pieces together and to understand how things work and to kind of to figure it out. But I do have to I have to defer to experts when I really start diving into stuff, and that's why like when I'll put out my series on a story of life exploring abiogenesis, I get it peer reviewed, and I'll go to actual biochemists, and some of them are Christian, or one of them was a Christian, and some of them or the other two I think were atheists, but I try to get an understanding of am I presenting the information in an accurate way and in a way that is, that a PhD in the field can break it down and be like, actually, like I think when I was talking about it on the Here and How podcast, I accidentally referred to like nucleic acids as amino acids one time, and I was eating myself up over that, and I made sure not to make that mistake in the video, but the video was also peer reviewed and the podcast wasn't, because the podcast is very free form, long format conversation.
Right.
So.
Right. And I think for a second, because there was something I was going to say to that and tag on to it. I completely lost my train of thought.
Christy asked a question. She asked if I have any plans for a book in the future.
Oh yeah.
I have had 3 or 4 different ideas for books, and I keep like I'll sit down to write one, and then I just like it I don't know if I'm just too busy with other stuff, or if I'm waiting for the book to write me. But I haven't gotten around to it yet. But hopefully I'll be able to start and really start something solid before too long. We'll see.
Awesome. Well, I know we'll all be looking out for it once it comes. So that would be really, really cool. I did remember what I wanted to say. Tagging on to what you had said about just learning like a little bit of everything that you know, like you have like a broad understanding of like different topics. I think one really cool thing, if everyone will take this away from tonight, is that when you learn this little bit of everything or dive in to any of these topics, it can help you in everyday life, I think, just by having better conversations with the people around you. Not to go all like biblical parables, but like you can plant seeds, right? You can plant seeds and kind of watch them grow in people and help people grow intellectually. And it's helped me just knowing a little bit of science is for like just climate change alone. Talk about politics a little bit more. Like it helped, like learning science helps me talk about religious topics and political topics, let alone scientific topics. It really broadens your horizons, and I think that's something that everyone can take away, and it can just help you in society and helps you look smarter, helps you feel smarter, and it helps the society around you. Just having these good conversations.
Absolutely. I when I was 17, I had just moved back to the States, and I'd graduated from high school, and I don't think I was sheltered by any stretch of the imagination, because I grew up overseas and I was traveling in a city of a few million people alone on a bus from the age of 10. So like I got to see other countries. I got to go to different places. I really had a good upbringing, an educational upbringing. But at the same time, I also felt like I was missing out on a lot. And I missed out on a lot of American pop culture. I missed out on a lot of stuff that I felt I didn't have an understanding enough to really be able to engage in most conversations. And so that lit a fire under me to really go out and try throwing myself into every field. So like even when I was in college, I took dance classes. I was in a fraternity. I did every single sport you can imagine. I did gymnastics. I did breakdancing. I did mixed martial arts. I like just trying to try out everything. I was in a film class, or not a film class, a film club. I did everything I could kind of that I had an interest in. I took part in, and so then when I finally graduated, then I realized that there were so many topics that I wasn't really well educated on. And one of my biggest heroes is Theodore Roosevelt, and there was a biography of his that I was reading that talked about how everyone that he talked to was kind of blown away with how well versed he was on pretty much every topic. They talked to him as though he was an expert in that field, and he knew enough to not just keep pace, but really contribute to the conversation. And I decided that I wanted to be able to not just sit idly on the side of a conversation, not having anything to contribute or know anything about the topic. I wanted to go out and throw myself into stuff and actually have something of value to contribute and to be able to take part. And So yeah, if I'm sure that there's other people out there who maybe a topic is new to them, and if it's interesting to you in any way, go explore it. And the more that you learn, the more you'll start realizing that there's incredibly amazing things to learn in every field. And sometimes the problem is we just haven't had the right teachers yet.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. And I'd like to extra point out on something that you had mentioned, all the things that you did in college. I know that a lot of people like in their 20s, 30s, sometimes 40s, and later, like they feel like they can't learn anything or do anything anymore. But I think it's important to say and remind people that like you always have time to like learn something new and do something new. That's kind of what like gives life meaning. Because like I'm like I don't know remember the exact um, phrase, but I'm like in the bigger picture, I'm a nihilist. I accept nihilism. Like nothing means anything at the end of the universe. But right here and right now, this is what matters. It's like you give your life meaning. Like um the meaning of life is what you make it. You don't need a higher power for that. Um so go do things and go learn things. And one thing I want to ask you, because you said you kind of learned some like mixed martial arts. Um, what kind of martial arts did you do? I teach martial arts. That's one of my day jobs.
So, I mean, I've done a wide variety. I've done some like I started off with like karate and taekwondo, but my biggest thing that I did for about 5 years was Brazilian jiu-jitsu.
Cool stuff.
And
Cool.
then I did various stand up as well, but kind of a cross between boxing and Muay Thai.
Okay. Some good hard hitting stuff.
Yeah, with
Oh,
taekwondo kicks thrown in as well.
dig it.
So
Dig it. Dig it. Cool. We have another
what
question
is it?
here.
What is it that you teach?
Oh, I teach. I won't give the full name because I don't want to associate things yet. But I teach a form of Hapkido.
Okay.
I teach a different form of jujitsu. It's not Brazilian. It's much more staying on your feet. I can still do hold downs, but I stay on my feet while I do it most of the time. And if we get on the ground, like I basically tear your skin off to get back up, kind of stuff. So there's that. There's a karate jitsu that
Yeah.
we also do. And that's very, very much on your feet. Like we don't do any floor stuff because you're just never ever supposed to get on the floor. It's very king of the hillish. Like I stand on my ground or I like your ground, so I'm going to take that. Is fun stuff. So
See,
those are the
I
three R's I
love.
do.
I mean, most fights wind up going to the ground,
Hmm.
and if you know how to do takedowns and you know how to get them, to the ground. I love the quote by I think it was one of the Gracie brothers that says like, "When we're on the mat, I'm a shark, and this is my ocean, and most people don't even know how to swim."
Yeah, 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 yeah. That's definitely a jujitsu way of thinking, and it's a cool one. I I never learned Gracie jujitsu on its own, but I've worked with a few people who have done some of it. So I like to try out mine on it every now and then and play with it. Because whenever I do, I learn what of my stuff works on it. And I learn completely new things. Because like I said, I
Yeah.
don't do Gracie jujitsu. So I learn a lot of new stuff with it. And it's really cool. It's a whole different system from my
Oh yeah.
jujitsu. Um, Another question here we have from 0132 132. I'm going to do want to point out that he was here last week. He joined in, and he's just a really awesome viewer. He's always in the live chat and like all over the the community. So I appreciate you coming back and watching again, Zero. Um, what's Thomas's opinion on pineapple on pizza? The reason that Yahweh will drown the world again, or just a moral failing of our society? Serious question. This will make
So
or break you.
so as someone who has been to Hawaii, um, and traveled the world extensively, I have a pretty diverse food palette, and I'm all for the pineapple on the pizza if it's done right.
There we go. All right. Because I like pineapple on pizza as well.
Yeah.
Um, if you haven't tried it yet, one that I used to really appeal to, I started putting pineapple, banana peppers, jalapenos, and then a little bit of Frank's Red Hot sauce on it. That's one of my favorite combinations with pineapple. So check that out.
You responded with boo.
Boo.
Well,
Get over it, Zero.
The beautiful thing of this world and individualism is I can eat pineapple on pizza and it won't affect you in the slightest.
That's a true story. Aurora, this is the first time I saw Aurora here in the live chat.
The first
she's
comment
just
is
like, you're both dead to me.
We're not saying you guys have to eat it. I mean, just saying.
Yeah, right.
It's we're atheists. We're not dogmatic like that.
Right. To each their own, but like you ought to like it.
You can be a free thinker about pineapple too.
For real. I said thanks, Aurora. Please subscribe. But yeah, well, I think that's our show for the night. I got to get ready for work soon. I'm supposed to be there in 20 minutes, whatever.
Wow.
But
it's a late night shift.
Yeah, I do weird shifts, and I try.
What do you do?
I stock at a grocery store. I'm an assistant manager for a vendor, and I stock all night. I'm trying to do 4 10-hour days a night, so I can still teach martial arts and still do this and still do stuff with my kids. So I stay pretty busy.
Cool.
Yeah, but
well, this has actually been a really fun chat. We've covered a wide variety of topics. I feel like we've done it in a fun and interesting way. So, Godless Iowa, now that you're getting here at the very end of the stream, you need to go back to the beginning and watch from the beginning, and Nacha witness as well. Although, has Nacha been in the chat this whole time? Or?
He's at least been here and back. So he was probably just listening.
Okay.
Godless cool. Iowan, though, kind of a bitch. Anyways,
congratulations on the wedding, by the way, Iowan.
That was a really cool wedding. That was really cool. I was very, very fortunate to be able to make it.
Oh, and, wow, you were at it?
Yeah. I got there like the morning after they crashed your stream, so I had to miss that. But then the next 2 nights, he just touched my face all over, so you might be able to find that on a different video, just him touching my face for an hour and a half. But yeah, this has been really fun, and we did cover a lot of topics. The astronomy stuff was super duper fun. We could talk about that anytime. And if I do make it down to Faithless Forum, I'm gonna have to bring my telescope and my stargazing binoculars, and like we should have a stargazing night for anyone who wants to come. I think
I'd say absolutely. Just expect a lot of light pollution in Dallas.
I know. That's what sucks. This just sucks.
Hey, thanks again for having me on, and sorry about last week. Hopefully this stream has made up for it.
Absolutely.
Hopefully this is enjoyable to you and to everyone in the chat.
I think it was. I think this was super fun. I hope everyone else enjoyed it. So cool. Well, thank you all for coming. If you haven't, go subscribe to Thomas's channel. I wasn't subscribed until like 3 months ago for some reason. So go double check. Make sure you are subscribed. And also subscribe to the Here in Hell podcast. And subscribe to me if you haven't yet. Do that. Thank you again. Everyone have a wonderful, wonderful night. And I'll see you again, I think, on Monday. I'll be here for 2 interviews back to back. So everyone have a nice weekend. Thanks.
Peace.